I work as a security guard for a company in California. This story takes place during the peak of COVID when the world was turned upside down. Companies were shutting down, employees were being laid off, and offices became nearly deserted. Like many others, I was assigned to work at different locations as needed, but this one particular site, it was different. It was a collection of old office buildings, isolated, far away from the busy parts of California. My job required me to patrol these buildings at night. The company provided accommodations nearby, as shifts would change every month, but my duty was to patrol one building specifically. It was an old, abandoned office that had been closed since the pandemic hit. Despite being vacant, the equipment inside was expensive, and my boss had strict instructions for us. During every 8-hour shift, we had to visit the building 3 times and share photos from our patrol in a work group chat as proof. For the first few nights, everything was normal. It was quiet. Too quiet. Even during the day, the place had a haunting vibe, but at night it was unsettling, the kind of silence that makes you constantly look over your shoulder. My shift always felt longer than it actually was, and though I tried to pass the time by listening to music, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. On the third night, I began my routine patrol. The building was dimly lit with only a few lights flickering here and there. As I entered, the silence felt suffocating. I walked through the ground floor, took the required pictures, and made my way up via the elevator to the first floor. Everything seemed normal: desks, chair, and the usual office setup. I moved up to the third floor and it was the same. But when I reached the fourth floor, it was completely different. The fourth floor was empty. It looked like a storage area for old office files and broken furniture. Dust blanketed everything, and a single flickering bulb barely lit the space. The air felt heavier there, like it hadn't been touched by time. I took the required pictures and sent them to the group chat. But within moments, one of the employees from the research company replied with a question mark. I was confused. I sent a voice message explaining that the photos were from the fourth floor. To my surprise, he immediately tagged my boss and reminded him of something. I told you no one should go to the fourth floor. My boss quickly messaged me, instructing me to never visit the fourth floor again. Apparently, the research company that owned the building had explicitly forbidden access to that floor, though no one had bothered to explain why during our briefing. I didn't understand the big deal. The floor seemed harmless to me, so I chalked it up to company policy and resolved to avoid it in the future. But something about their urgency lingered in my mind. A few nights later, while sitting outside the building in a small security shed, I heard something that made my heart race. It sounded like a chair being dragged across the floor. From the fourth floor, I paused music and strained to listen. Sound came again, louder this time. It was unmistakable. Someone or something was moving furniture up there. I immediately checked the perimeter of the building. The main gate was locked and the fencing around the property was secure. There was no way anyone could have gotten in without me noticing. Still, I messaged the other guards in our private group chat to ask if anyone had came to my location. Everyone replied, sharing photos of their own posts, proving they were nowhere near me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Gathering my courage, I decided to investigate. As I entered the building, I noticed the elevator was already on the fourth floor. That made no sense. The elevator should always return to the ground floor when idle. My heart pounded as I pressed the button to call the elevator. When it arrived, I stepped in and reluctantly pressed the button for the fourth floor. I didn't plan to step out. I just wanted to take a quick look. As the elevator doors opened, I heard hurried footsteps echoing down the staircase. Someone or something was running away. I froze, staring into the dimly lit floor. The air was thick with dust, but I couldn't see anyone. The flickering bulb made it impossible to focus. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But my voice only echoed back to me. Then I saw it. In the corner of the room, near a stack of old files, a shadow moved. It wasn't my imagination. It was a figure, tall, motionless, and staring right at me. My body went cold as I stepped back into the elevator and slammed the closed door button. As the doors shut, I heard the faint sound of laughter, low, guttural, and inhuman. When I got back to the ground floor, I ran out of the building and locked the main door behind me. I spent the rest of the night outside, unable to go back in. The next morning, I reported everything to my boss. They brushed it off as my imagination, but I know what I saw, or what saw me. I never went back to that building again, and to this day, I still wonder what was on the fourth floor that they didn't want us to see. Whatever it was, it's still there, and I pray I never cross paths with it again.
This story happened when I got a job as a security supervisor for an engineering firm. After a few weeks of training, I was assigned to a remote location at the border between two countries. It was a desolate desert area, stretching for miles and no signs of civilization, just sand and silence. The camp I was stationed at housed about 25 to 26 engineers, living and working in makeshift tents. My responsibility was to oversee the security of the camp along with 3 security guards under my command. During the day, everything felt normal, busy. Even the engineers went about their task and we carried out our duties without any issues. But as soon as night fell, the atmosphere would change entirely. The desert became eerily quiet, like stepping into a void. The camp had minimal lighting, just enough to pierce through the darkness. But the stillness was unsettling. To manage the long nights, we split our shifts. 2 guards worked from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., while the other 2 took over until morning. One particular night, it was my turn to work the second shift, starting at 2 a.m. However, my partner, one of the guards scheduled to join me, suddenly fell ill. He complained of fever and body aches and begged to take the night off. Since nothing unusual had ever happened, I told him to rest while I handled the night shift alone. By 3 a.m., the camp was dead silent. Everyone was asleep and it was just me sitting alone under the vast, starless sky. I remember staring out into the endless desert when I noticed something strange in the distance. At first, it was just a faint movement, something white against the dark sands. My initial thoughts was what it might be, a traveler who had lost their way. But as it got closer, I realized something was off. The figure wasn't walking like a normal person. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if it wasn't affected by the uneven desert terrain. I shone my flashlight toward it, hoping to get a better look. What I saw froze me in place. The figure was tall, unnaturally tall. Its height had to be at least 9 or 10 feet. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its face looked lifeless, like someone who had been drained of all blood. It had an elongated face with hollow eyes, and its posture was hunched, making it look even more grotesque. Its arms were disturbingly long, hanging down past its knees, and its fingers were thin with claw-like nails that gleamed in the dim light. Despite the terrifying appearances, the most unsettling part was the way it stared at me. It wasn't just looking, it was observing, as if I were some kind of prey. I wanted to move, to call for help, but my body refused to obey. I was paralyzed, trapped in the horrifying realization that this thing wasn't human. The figure stopped about 20 feet away from me, its gaze never breaking. Then it did something that sent a chill down my spine. It reached into the pocket of its tattered white clothing and pulled something out. At first, I thought it might be asking for help or offering something, but as it extended its hand, I saw it, glowing, and eerie red light radiated from its palm. It looked like it was holding burning embers or perhaps pieces of molten coal. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what I was witnessing. But before I could react, it began placing the glowing embers into its mouth one by one, chewing on them as if they were nothing more than candy. The sight was so surreal, so horrifying that I felt my knees buckle. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The creature suddenly turned its attention to the tents behind me, where the engineers were sleeping. It opened its mouth wide, unnaturally wide, and it let out a guttural growl before spitting out a barrage of fiery embers towards the camp. At that moment, I snapped out of my paralysis and instinctively reached for my gun. I fired a shot into the air, hoping to scare it off. The loud bang echoed through the desert, and to my relief, the creature recoiled. It turned its head towards me one last time before retreating into the darkness, disappearing into the endless sands. I rushed to check on the engineers, who had been awaked by the commotion. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but the fear on their faces mirrored my own. To this day, I have no idea what that thing was. Was it a ghost, a demon, or some unexplainable entity that exists in the desolate corners of the world? All I know is the terror of that night has stayed with me, and I vowed never to take another job in the middle of nowhere again.